Hope everybody's enjoying the conference so far. Our next session is we're going to welcome Education Management Corporation's Chris DelSanto. Chris is someone I've had the pleasure of working with for the past 6 years. I've watched as Chris has built and refined compliance teams at EDMC. So get out your notebooks, because with compliance teams in high demand at both startups and mature companies, Chris will be talking us through the 10 essential steps to building out a compliance practice. So I'm going to turn over the stage to Chris DelSanto.
Thank you. So I'll give you a little bit more background on myself. I've been in the regulatory compliance within higher ed for the past 16 years. Prior to stepping into the regulatory compliance arena, I had about a 9-year career in graphic design. So my step into regulatory compliance was I was working for an agency that our biggest client was Career Education Corporation, and their compliance was giving me a headache. It was just like, we needed speed to market. You guys aren't fast enough. We need to understand the regs. What's going on? Why doesn't this work? So I started asking them, well, train me, help me understand so that I can help my team understand how to create material that will get out of your backlog faster. So eventually, what they did was send me to a couple of boot camps and then offered me a job. Because they were saying, we don't understand what you're talking about as far as how to automate process, and we don't understand half the stuff you say when you're talking this marketing speak, so we want to have you build a whole sub-department dedicated to marketing compliance. So after much deliberation, I did cross over to the dark side and take the job. So today I want to go over 10 steps on what to do. These are going to be just very practical, very common sense things that oftentimes get overlooked, and then share some of the challenges and obstacles that I faced in building it. So the first one, again, I built for Career Education Corporation, and then after about 8 years, I joined EDMC's team to build a department for them as well. So the first thing is to define your compliance goals. You have to understand what your regulatory bodies are, your internal compliance needs, and then you need to decide ownership of everything. So for EDMC, what we are faced with is we have over 1,000 approvals among 148 different regulators. That's a lot to wrap your head around. So we had the US Department of Education. We had 81 different state licensing agencies. We had 31 state Veterans Affairs agencies, 31 different accrediting bodies. We were in all the regionals, one of the nationals, and then programmatic accreditation as well. And then we had SEVIS, which is for international student compliance. Then once you wrap your head around all those different regulations, all those different bodies, everybody that's governing how you are going to be marketing, you have to look at your non-industry specific agencies as well. Because you have the FTC, the CFPB, and anything that regulates just marketing in general. So then you start gathering all that material. And it's difficult because, especially with state licensing agencies, you're talking about laws that are written, and you have to just weed through all that and figure out which ones actually apply to marketing. Then you have to understand your internal compliance needs. What are your brand guidelines? It's everything beyond just your regulations. What is everything that governs the marketing, not just the rules and the laws? What are your internal brand guidelines? What are your business's risk threshold? And that's important to understand, is how much of a risk are you willing to take? How much of a risk are you willing to mitigate? And then as well as, are there any external agreements or consent judgments? Nothing strengthens a compliance effort like a consent judgment, believe me. And then once you have your universe of what's governing your marketing material, then you need to decide, where does marketing compliance fit? Is it the primary responsibility of the marketing department, legal, or compliance? And a lot of that's going to depend on the size of your company. The default go-to is typically legal. There's laws involved, there's lawsuits, the possibility of lawsuits there, so it goes into the legal department. In my experience, that actually doesn't work too well because there isn't a vested interest in the legal department to make this thing work well and make it work efficient. And that's not a slam against the legal department, because they're oftentimes tasked with much higher impact responsibilities, and they're told, well, here's this marketing compliance thing. You'll just be reviewing some marketing stuff. It's just like a part-time hat. It very quickly becomes something that necessitates at least a subdivision unto itself. So if it does fall in the legal department, what I would encourage is that you actually do dedicate somebody. You're not just assigning it to a lawyer or a paralegal. That is a part-time responsibility. They have too much on their plate already most of the time, and there's no incentive for them to create efficiencies, to continue dialogue with the marketing teams. And oftentimes it's unfair to both parties because they just don't have the time to invest in it. And so you end up with this struggle of them becoming like the no patrol. They don't have the engagement time to work with marketing and develop the kind of collaboration that's necessary to make this work efficiently. Another area is, I've worked, so in 16 years, 2 companies, I've worked and had to partner with 8 different CMOs. So that's like an average of about 1 every 2 years. So that poses some challenges too, but oftentimes, the new CMO will come in and says, well, this should be our responsibility. It's our material. We should be responsible for monitoring ourselves. And there's merit there, but again, why would you want that? If you're in marketing, the marketing space has become so complicated and so challenging. Focus on what you guys do best. And that's figure out the strategies in the marketing. Certainly be vested in the conversation, but don't take on that responsibility. It doesn't work well because you're burning time that you can be putting into other areas that are necessary to advance your goals. And another disadvantage with having it in marketing is if you do get audited or if you do get investigated, external agencies are going to be a lot less tolerant to marketing watching marketing. It's going to be really difficult to convince them that it's anything but a fox guarding the hen house kind of scenario. So that leaves you with a compliance department. So if you have a corporate compliance department, it's that go-between between legal and marketing. And that's really the best place for this thing to live. One of the things that I always tell my team is that if legal is complaining that we're being too liberal and marketing's complaining that we're being too conservative, we know we're right where we need to be. So we can advocate on both sides and be that kind of the mediator in between the two. So once you've established where it's living, you're going to establish your functional scope. And this is where you're going to decide your volume, and then whether you are going to do completely a review function or monitoring, or both. And your volume is going to be drastically different depending on what you're choosing. And each one of those is going to be different. So if you're looking at the review function, that's where you're looking at everything before it actually goes out. And that process path is going to look very different than a monitoring path. And you need to establish what is that path, what is the process involved. And the thing that I would really encourage is before you go looking for the technology solution, get your process down first. Technology is a wonderful thing and it builds efficiencies, but it overlays a process. And a well thought out process is going to save you a world of heartache down the road, because the technology just enhances that. And then the volume. What does need to come in? So if you're looking at just the review function itself, what needs to come in? One of the mistakes I made early on was I listened to the folks above me who were saying, we need to see everything. We don't even know what everything is, but just review everything. So I was like, great, everything. They were using hard copies and faxes for their review component, and I said, this is beyond antiquated. Let's do something really simple to start with. We'll do an alias email and say everybody can just email what they have, and we'll take a look at it. And we didn't define anything. We just said, send us everything. and they sent everything. Immediate backlog, no way to keep up with it. We had no idea even how to parse it all out because everything, there was no concept as to what that volume really looked like, and there wasn't the dialogue initially. That was another mistake that I made. There wasn't the initial dialogue with marketing to determine what is it that is everything, what is going on, what are you guys doing, how do we categorize these things? So you want to categorize your volume, whether it's print material, commercials, or TV spots, web videos, newsletters. So we have very defined categories so that we can then track this stuff as well. And then we can determine how much of this stuff is, how much of the marketing budget is allocated for each of those categories so we get a sense in the size of what is going to be coming in for review. And then build your technology around that process. When we were starting initially, again, we had that initial email. And then we moved to, we actually tricked out our help desk software to create a ticketing process for it. And then that became very apparent that that was inefficient as well. And we needed to, the focus was always on how do we make this more and more efficient for the marketing team? Because the easier it is to use, the more likely they are to use it. So then we moved to more of like a SharePoint site environment, and then eventually built it out and customized a .NET website that is that has a workflow, so everything that comes in can then circulate out to everybody who needs to touch it. And so that was our review process. Now with monitoring is very different. Monitoring is saying we really, we need to just keep an eye out there. What is out there? Most of the monitoring comes into play with the material that's out on the web. So initially what we were doing was manually seeding things and just going out and looking, doing Google searches and that kind of thing, and going out to asking the marketing partners, where are we? Where's our material out on the web? And then we would go and start building this database of things of where things were at. It was the most inefficient thing in the world, and I burned through a couple of employees because they just got so overwhelmed with it. There was no way for them to keep up with it. We were looking at seriously less than like 1% of what was out there. And then that's when we entered into our partnership with PerformMatch to help us with that. And that's where technology far surpassed any process we could have put in place, because they had the process already for monitoring the web, and they partnered with us. And we went from, our volume was typically before PerformMatch, we were looking at probably, on a review side, we were looking at probably about 60,000 pieces of material a year. And then when we incorporated, and that was including our monitoring effort at the time, and then once we included the technology, it was over 100,000 pieces per year. So a much broader scope, much more efficient, and much better retention tool for the people who are responsible for the monitoring. So it's important to keep that in place. And then what is it that you're monitoring? You need to help define that as well. As far as, is it just third-party vendors? We actually point it to our own internal sites as well, so that we're keeping up with that, and that helps us in respect of initial review, and then just slide it over to monitoring instead of doing an auditing process on it. So once you have your scope set, the other thing that you want to really do is determine when you're developing your volume set in all your categories. One of the things that's really key that will save you time in the long run is determine how long does it take to review these things. So you have your traditional print material, your small space ads, your brochures, your full scoped out websites. What's the time commitment on those? You need to understand that, so that when you enter into the partnering with the marketing departments, that you generate a very clear expectation of what they can expect. What is the turnaround going to look like? And that is just manually going through and just conducting the review and timing yourself and figuring out what is the average on each of the different categories, so you can bake that into your process. So once you have all that, you need to kind of look at what is the staffing model. You know, who to hire, how many, and when, right? So the who, what are the kind of qualifications that you're looking for here? Again, this is, I kind of describe my team as the island of misfit toys. If you were to line up all the resumes and take a look at it, one of the things I was doing actually even to prepare for this talk was to say, okay, what's the common thread as to what is my team? You know, what are the common qualifications that came out? And it was really kind of hard to pinpoint it because of how eclectic the group is. And the thing is that it works though. And then I was trying to decide, well, why does it work so well when there isn't that common thread? And I started thinking about it as far as what's the one thing I look for when I'm interviewing somebody? And it really has to do more with the soft skills than the hard skills. Because you're looking for somebody that is a creative problem solver, somebody that can look at mass amounts of data, someone that can do very monotonous work and still enjoy it and not get burned out by it. But it's the customer service aspect of it, because one of the things I stress with my team is that although this is a requirement, the marketing is required to send the material into us. So I don't ever want them to feel that way. One of the things I stress is we're not the no patrol. We need to find out what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and if there's a reg that they're violating with what's been submitted, how do we empower marketing to do their job? Because there's merit to what they put together. You know, and never to assume that one of the things that used to frustrate me a lot when I was in marketing was just the assumption that compliance made or that legal made that I was trying to do something wrong. That was the baseline for interacting with me was you're trying to get away with something. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm trying to get away with getting my deadline met. That's what I'm trying to do. And that was something that was always forefront in my mind as I was building this out is we're a service to marketing. We might be required, but we have to have a service mindset. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And we have to believe that they're trying to help the company succeed just as much as we are. And if we can partner in that way, then the whole thing is going to go more smoothly. So that's the first thing I look for is customer service. How well can they evidence the fact that they have a really solid customer focus? And then help them understand that marketing, we are not overlords of marketing. We are in service to marketing. So that is one of the key things. But some of the hard skills that we looked at that have worked really well is somebody that had credit card fraud investigation in their background. That was one of my top people, was somebody that just could go through a lot of information and spot minor differences that were wrong. Somebody that had an eye for that can just go through massive stuff and go through things very quickly, very high volume, burn through the information and find what's wrong. And that was a skill set that worked very well for me. Another thing was somebody that had marketing in their background, and that's a little tougher to find somebody that really enjoys the marketing world and to want to step into compliance. It's not an easy sell, but we have one lady that heads up our marketing review team that she came actually from admissions. So she worked in admissions for a while, then worked in student services, and then stepped into the role of marketing. But if you can find somebody with a strong marketing background, it does help because they understand the world, they understand the jargon, they understand the nuances, especially when you're looking at the web stuff. If you could find somebody that really has a strength like a project manager is actually one of my strongest people that did the monitoring side of it, came from the project management side. She was managing the vendors that she then became a monitor for. So it's those kind of things that we're looking for. But really the most important thing is the soft skills and making sure that they understand. Because I've had people come and tell me that one of the greatest reasons that they wanted the job was because they love red ink. And they love telling people what they're doing wrong. And I was like, nope, thank you for your time. It's not going to work. And as far as the knowledge base of what you're looking for, they don't need to know the regs. The regs can be taught. It's a lot, but once you do the work and the effort to consolidate and aggregate everything into a single source, it becomes very easy to just train them up. And you just need to make sure that you have a really solid training program. It takes about a year, is what I always tell the new folks, is after the year mark, you're finally going to say, wow, I understood that whole conversation. I understood everything that went on in that meeting, but it really takes a year to get comfortable with everything that's going on. And then as far as when to hire, it really depends on step 4 that I'll talk about in just a second, as far as gaining the support of the upper management, because it really depends on what is the model that you're going to roll out and how do you staff it. But you have to be able to write up the justification reports in a way that says, here's the volume we're looking at, this is how much time it takes to review all those. So in order to justify the staffing model, you look at that and you say, if this is the volume you want us to review, this is the amount of time it's going to take to review it, therefore it's going to take this many full-time employees. And that is a really solid argument when you're going and talking to the folks that are going to be approving your budget for it. You want the metrics behind it. The more metrics you can put under it, the stronger your proposal is going to be. So it really depends on, like I said, when you're gaining the support, what you want to do is you create 3 different models. You have your bronze, your silver, and your gold. Here's the ideal. If we really are going to review everything and monitor everything, this is our volume, these are all our categories, this is how many full-time employees I'm going to need in order to make it work. And then you say, okay, well, if we're just going to review, and we're not going to worry about monitoring right now, then it's going to take this many full-time employees. Or if we're just going to monitor, this is what it's going to take. And then you talk about it, and as you're creating the conversation with the senior leadership, one of the things, you don't have a lot of time with these folks. There really is a matter of how do you convince them to spend the money to make something that's going to work and work well. The breakdown of the 3 tiers that I explained, it is so vital to do it that way, because one of the mistakes that I made is they said, this is all great, let's do this, and you go ahead and do it, and then we'll staff it as we go along. And that was really challenging because I really ended up hurting my relationship with marketing, because the volume just came flooding in, and there was just no human way I can possibly keep up with the amount of reviews that were in queue. So I had an instant backlog. Marketing got frustrated. It was more of the same, and nothing was improving. So you just don't do it. I mean, it's one of those things where you just really have to take a stance on this, because you're going to fail before you even start if you're not allowed to staff it properly. So it really is a matter of saying, no, you can have the gold standard as long as you have the gold team, but you can't have the bronze team at the gold level. It's just going to fail. And the other thing to keep in mind when you're talking to the senior leadership oftentimes is their mindset is this is completely overhead. It has no impact on our profit. So therefore, we want to make it as skeletal as possible. The part there that you really want to focus on is not that compliance is just overhead. It's an investment in the company's ability to maintain business and generate profit. Because if compliance isn't in place, and that goes south, as we heard with the panel with the regulators, I mean, it's devastating if you misstep on this, and it doesn't need to be an intentional misstep. So it's protecting the company's ability to generate profit. It's not just strictly overhead. And having those kind of conversations really helped open up the budget a little bit and see the need for it. So then once you have all that developed, you want to develop your formal policies, procedures, and standards. Now this sounds pretty basic, but a lot of times this gets really confused for some reason. Policy is the what to do. Process is how to do it, and the standards are how to measure it. So oftentimes policy and process get really confused, but you really want to keep them distinct if you want a really strong documented process. And there's a couple of reasons why you want the strength of documentation is one, it helps you assess and it helps you build better efficiencies over time. And two, if you have the unfortunate experience of having to be investigated and audited, you can say, here's our process, here you go. It doesn't take you weeks and weeks and weeks to get it out there. You have the ability to just say, no, this is something that we're very proud of. Here it is. Go ahead and review it and look over it. And that definitely helps in that process. So you want the policy. What needs to happen? Marketing needs to come in for a review. It can be something that basic. Now the process is, how does it get sent in for a review? What is the cycle that it goes through? How many people does it touch? And then the standards are how are we measuring it? So all those different regulations that I talked about at the opening, it was a matter of distilling that all down to the common core of it and getting it into a manual that can be used instead of going to 148 different sets of regulations while we're reviewing a print piece. We have one standard that incorporates everybody and incorporates the spirit of those regulations and those laws. And then you want to create your training. You have process training and you have standards training. Process training is who needs to send the material in. You have to know your audience. Making sure you're hitting everybody and making the training very easy and very accessible. How do we go ahead and submit it? You want something formal. You don't want to just do one-off meetings. You want a formal training. And then the standards, you want to build those relationships with marketing in order to say, let me help you understand the regs. You know, it's one thing to say, well, show me the reg, and that's usually a sign that marketing is saying, I don't want to do what you're saying, right? But it's more than that. It's sharing the whys, and because if they can understand the why, you're going to build stronger partnerships with everybody. So help them understand the whys, take them through training about the process, and make it tailored. Target it to what it is that they're doing. If they're a lead generator, you're targeting to what their particular type of marketing is. If you're looking at people who are doing videos, you're giving them testimonial guidelines to help them. You know, it should all be about empowering them to do it right the first time so that you don't have a lot of editing. Now, communicating with stakeholders and partners, you have informal, formal communication, and then you want a feedback loop presented. Now, the informal dialogue should be happening constantly through this whole thing as you're doing it. When you're looking at how do we create the standards, what are we doing, you want marketing to be a vested partner in that. The formal communications, you're talking about your formal rollout plan, your formal communications, and tailoring it to each tier of the company that needs to understand what's going on. And don't ever assume that they know. Just because you've been working on it for months doesn't mean that everyone else knows about it. You have to communicate. You can never over-communicate. And the informal process of it is so important because you want that partnership. You know, I really believe that compliance is built on trust and collaboration. It has to be an understanding that we're part of the same team. The compliance and marketing have to work hand in hand in order for it to work. You know, one of the things that I really am proud of that we've accomplished in our area, in the company that I'm at now, is that marketing invites us to their brainstorming sessions for their year-end cap-off and their planning for where are we taking our marketing for the next year, so that we can speak to the concepts and everything that they're doing ahead of time and give them a fair warning as to some of the obstacles that are happening. You want to ensure that your complete record keeping is set. You know, what does need to be kept? What is being asked of you to keep records of? You know, we do daily stats, weekly stats, we do monthly reports, quarterly reports, and annual reports. And those reports vary depending on the audience. We have a steering committee that oversees everything, and those go out. And it's a matter of making sure your metrics are solid and that you're keeping solid track of it. And then commit to the audit process. Once a year, we have an audit process where we do a self-assessment and we're looking from stage one. What is our process? What changes have we made? How do we improve it? If you have an internal audit department, they're probably more dreaded than the compliance department, but welcome them in. Have them take a look at your process and analyze it and help you improve it. It's only there to benefit you. And then stay informed of the new regulations, laws, and best practices. You got to keep up on it. As things are changing, you want to be able to incorporate them. And sometimes it's going to be a matter of an immediate release of something, or other times it can be just baked into the normal assessment process, but you have to keep up with it and make sure that you're incorporating it in everything that you're doing. And that is a very quick overview of 10 steps to build a very strong compliance department. Thank you very much.